Welcome to DTx Equals, where thought leaders in digital therapeutics put a stake in the ground on what makes DTx DTx. With me today is Simon Thomas. Simon is currently Freespira's president, but was their CEO before that and has been there for 9 years, over 9 years, which is just about as long as anybody has been at any digital therapeutics company. So Simon's background is in research and development. Simon's background's in research and development, and we met representing our respective companies in the Digital Therapeutics Alliance Clinical Evidence Generation Work Group. And I'm so happy to have you here today, Simon.
Thank you very much. Great to be here.
So tell me, what's a formative event in your life or career that influenced your path in DTx?
Sure. Well, I've spent my whole career in medical devices, and as you can probably tell by some grey hair, it's been a while. You know, I started out in patient monitoring for newborns, adults, then fetal monitoring, and then some therapeutics. And as part of that early work, I helped develop new methods for blood gas monitoring back in the day. You know, pulse oximetry and capnography when those industries were just getting going. You know, and along the way, I learned a lot about different areas of physical medicine. You know, anesthesia, critical care, obstetrics, urology, to name a few. But I never worked in mental health because medical devices really weren't used to treat mental health. So places I worked, we never went there. So when the opportunity came to join Freespira arose back in 2013, when I got a call from the founding CEO, Deborah Riesenthal, who's now on the DTA board, it was a very interesting opportunity, being mental health treatment, which utilized the sort of blood gas monitoring technologies that I'd grown up with early in my career, and with a totally novel treatment which had been already demonstrated in one clinical study to be effective. So I joined. That's how I got into, as you said, one of the first. We didn't even call ourselves a digital therapeutic then, because the term hadn't been coined, and we ended up thinking kind of that we were a medical device company, but with tech that was used at home and to treat a mental health condition. That's how I got in.
So as the person leading science and all of that, how does it, do you have any observations now looking at all of the ways that FDA is now working with companies to kind of demonstrate the viability, the clinical viability of their products? Now that DTx is a thing that everybody, kind of has specific ideas around, versus when you kind of had to pave that way as a company that was really early on the scene. Do you have any observations or thoughts about how that has evolved over time?
Yeah, I mean, my frame for DTx is very much shaped by my years in the traditional med device industry. You know, so emphasis on quality and design and manufacturing and service, regulatory approvals from the FDA, clinical studies and publications to show effectiveness, and then we can get into this shortly, expecting kind of a long and arduous path to market, because practice in medicine doesn't change quickly, even if you're delivering a new monitoring modality or a new therapeutic. But so, my observations about DTx is to some extent shaped by that worldview, which very much says, okay, guys, come on, you got a treatment, show that it works, design a study, execute it, demonstrate that it's effective, and then get it published. If you're not willing to basically put in that work, spend the money to do it, then you really shouldn't be playing in this sandbox and calling yourself a therapeutic. Because if you want to claim,
so none of this was a surprise to you, right? It's everybody else is surprised to hear, oh my gosh, I got to show evidence, and you're like, yeah, that's what you do.
Well, yeah, that's what you do. I mean, now then it gets to be the discussion of, well, what sort of evidence should we do? Do we need to provide? Do we need to design DTx studies like drug studies, or like very large, hundreds of thousands of patients, etc., very expensive, always an RCT? Or do we do more like traditional medical device clinical studies, 50 to 100 patients, not necessarily an RCT? I mean, they're both valid ways of investigating the effectiveness. So you just have to pick what you think's doable within your organization and is going to give you, adequate scientific evidence for the regulators, for publication. And then when you've got a few of them strung together, you probably have a shot at getting payers to pay attention.
Yeah, it's interesting because I think, in my background at Twill, we were trying to come from software into medical device. And you see that as a relatively common, people with software backgrounds trying to enter into the
Mhm.
medical device space, as opposed to people in medical device who are already quite familiar with how it's done, trying to leverage what's known there. And it's taken some time to catch up. So it's interesting to hear that even though Freespira was one of the very early entrants, they had the benefit of your background in medical device, and that kind of contributes to your overall path to market.
Well, it certainly helped us, with our longevity, because it's helped get funding, along the way. And, we now have a pretty substantial body of evidence, 6 published studies, including the real world one that we just published, reporting on 1,500 patients. We've treated a total of over 5,000, which is it's a good number of patients to have helped with these conditions.
Absolutely. So yeah, Freespira is one of those companies that publishes freely, which I have always appreciated as another person in this space that likes to publish. It kind of seems like, coming from some of these
Mhm.
more commercial business backgrounds, people go, "No, that's a secret. Like, we can't tell people about that." I'm like, "No, clinical evidence is not a secret. You tell everybody."
All right, one last comment. Right, if you're designing a study, you've got to put it on clinicaltrial.gov, so it's then public anyway. The basic design and what you're going after, and clearly you should be publishing it at the end anyway. You don't have to disclose all of your secret sauce, but you certainly need to report on what you did and what the results were.
No, that's right. And I remember in the early days, our competitive intelligence folks trying to figure out what other companies were doing, and they would post things on clinicaltrials.gov, but like not put the company name, or there were all these people kind of like trying to do tricks to hide what they're doing. And at some level, there are things that you just don't hide, right? So I think there's been an interesting culture shock there, as companies in DTx realize, like, you're entering a scientifically based field, and in science, we declare what we're doing in advance.
Well, right, that's the way science works. You look for other people to come behind you and replicate your results
You'd
eventually.
think that's obvious, but here we are. So, in your mind, DTx equals what? What's kind of the most defining issue in DTx today from where you're
Um,
standing?
Well, I think after a huge burst of enthusiasm in the pandemic for all things digital as solutions to many challenges in healthcare, I think DTX is now wrestling with a fundamental question about whether patients and the marketplace are really ready to embrace digital therapeutics, which I'll define this way. So it's an app, you download it from one of the stores, Google or Apple, and you get basically prescribed and issued a code that makes it work. Right? It's the bring your own device from a hardware perspective, and the app's downloaded from the store. And I think we're wrestling with the reality that the marketplace and patients are not necessarily quite where the industry thinks they should be. Where the industry thinks they should be really isn't relevant. But that's kind of the current reality. Now, in that context, I think recent advocacy work by DTA, the Prescription Digital Therapeutics Bill, and getting the new code issued by CMS are huge, and will go a long way ultimately to mainstream the DTX treatments. And they're also making a very clear distinction between true therapeutics, as we've talked about before, with evidence and the rest, and the myriad of other apps and things which address general health and wellness. So, in my opinion, I think the defining issue for DTX today is really the industry is maturing. It's now kind of into the adolescent phase, and it's beginning to figure out what it's going to be when it grows up. And to my mind, it's looking more and more like a traditional med device model with evidence and quality products and structured product development that you do in medtech all the time, rather than whatever it thought it was going to be back a few years.
It's interesting too, because I at least had the career experience of starting off as a digital wellness product and then following the journey into digital therapeutics. And at that time, I kind of thought, oh, well, once people discover that you can actually make treatment claims about what you're doing with the digital product, that the wellness part's going to melt away. And there aren't going to be all of these companies that are kind of saying they're treating, but like they're not. And they're out there on the market too. I thought that was like a thing that would naturally dissipate, and it really hasn't, right? There's still a very
No,
robust wellness market of digital products, and not necessarily clear ways for employers and health plans to tell the difference. So it's a really
right.
interesting thought, is that we're doing it like a medical device, but there's still a very vibrant market everywhere across that spectrum, and especially enforcement discretion, where you have this legitimacy of being a medical
Yeah,
device, but like not.
right. I mean, I think that's great. I mean, I've got nothing against the health and wellness products. I think they serve a really useful purpose. The one thing that has been challenging for providers and health systems is there's just so many of them, and they're so similar that how do you cut through the noise? And clearly, with DTAs offering suggestions, and payers and systems are coming up with their own criteria for figuring out, okay, what's kind of real and what should we be offering to our members. I mean, the other challenge is utilization, right? Because just the number of downloads doesn't really tell you very much. Key is how much are they being used, and what benefits are the patients seeing, and are the patients continuing to use them. And I haven't seen a huge amount of data sort of looking at that or trying to quantify it in objective meaning.
That's an that's an interesting problem, right? Because Freespira's core product has objective data that you used it,
Hmm.
right? You can it phones home and says, this person was using this for this amount of time, and here's what their graph looks like. But many digital products do
Right,
not have that, right? A CBT
right.
in a box type program, for example, it's like, I don't know, did you go do this activity or not, right? So there's a very real problem, and it's less obvious how to solve it. I think, not to say you have it easy in any way, but I think at least with your product is built by design to really clearly say when people have done things, and that's harder to do with some therapeutic modalities than others.
That is true. I mean, we have objective physiological data, which at the end of each session gets uploaded to our cloud, and the coaches can see it, so they can see if a patient's using the device and how they're progressing with the treatments. It always surprised me actually that some of the other sort of health and wellness apps didn't at least collect utilization data and didn't build kind of surveys in to have the patient tell how they're doing after a number of sessions.
What do you think the role is? I know that the coach has a very specific role in your product, but if we could talk just a little more broadly about, digital products in which you have a human who's seeing the data, what's the relative role of automated technology versus having that human element in terms of achieving the best clinical outcomes?
Right. So I mean, we by design early on we implemented a coach heavy model, believing that patients will respond better to live people that they're engaging with, that they can make connections with, and that they'll then basically to some extent follow directions, do the sessions, and then see the results like we've seen in the published clinical studies where there was a clinician directly involved. That said, now we've got thousands of patients and we know what the coaching experience is like. We're beginning to see ways of automating some of the feedback that the coaches provide. So that's an obvious opportunity for automation and enhancement as time goes by. So looking at automatic analysis of the coach interactions, potentially analyzing that, and then building out various AI-enabled feedback mechanisms so that the patient can engage with engage with Freespira or the other treatment pretty much whenever they want to do, because our coaches are available kind of 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. in local time zones. But if you want to talk to your coach outside those hours, you basically have to leave a message and we'll get back to you. So it's not the optimum patient experience, but it's not practical for a small company to provide 24-hour coverage.
No, it's a good point. It's not practical really for anybody, and so it's helpful to think about. I would love to press you just a little bit further for your thoughts on the difference between things only a coach can do or only a human can do, and the types of things you're describing, which you kind of identify, well, we could have probably automated that. Is the goal to basically leave the coach to do the things once everything is automated that can be to do magic coach things, right? Like special coach things, or is the
Right.
idea that ultimate technology will catch up to mimicking what a coach does?
Well, I don't think technology will catch up to what the coach does, because ultimately people make connections with people, and that's what achieves success. That's why personal trainers do a better job than just showing up at the gym. right? So the question is, how do we optimize the experience for the patient and provide enough support, but not beyond what's really needed for them to be successful. So I think this is a bit of a weakness of some of the download it yourself wellness applications that you get feedback on the app, which is great, and there's a very robust FAQ section with other videos and things. But at the end of the day, it's totally on you to use it or not. And from experience of having some injuries and needing to go through physical therapy and the like, knowing that I'm going to show up the next week, talk to my PT, he or she is going to see how much progress I've made dealing with this shoulder injury, that keeps me motivated to do the exercises at home, even when I don't really want to do it.
So on that note, and maybe it's related, maybe it's not, in your wildest dreams, what's something DTx will be able to do in the future that it can't do today?
Oh yeah, that's good. Well, one, achieve widespread adoption and utilization. Be as commonplace as taking medications for different conditions. Treat additional conditions. I mean, there's a lot of conditions, both purely behavioral and also where there's a large behavioral component, things like asthma, where I think there's some data suggesting that digital therapeutics can have benefit. And then a really interesting one I think about is how to adapt treatments to specific patients. So this would be personalized DTx. As you know, there's been a lot of this done over on the pharmaceutical side, also the biopharmaceutical side, thinking about looking at the patient's DNA and underlying physiological characteristics to tailor a treatment for them. And I think it should be possible to do a similar thing over on the digital side. So that'll be pretty exciting.
Yeah, that's one that I think personalization is like the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that people have been talking about for many years, and I haven't quite seen it happen yet. And I don't want to say I can't figure out why, because it's obviously very challenging, but it's interesting to me because, and this is back to the coach topic, right? When you're working with a human, the human talks to you, they ask a few questions, and then they personalize. So it's a known mechanism that humans do today. What's the gap between seeing that and mimicking it in technology that makes it so hard?
Well, one thing that can't be ignored is the regulatory impact of changing your protocol kind of without data. So if you're a therapist and you're dealing one-on-one with a patient, as you say, you answer some questions and then you're going to adapt where you lead them. When you've got an app, even with a coach, which is delivering basically a standardized, validated course of treatment, if you want to start personalizing it, you're going to have to demonstrate that the effectiveness of the personalized version is at least as good as the general version that's being used prior. And you're going to have to do that across the range of personalizations considered, right? And that's kind of a non-trivial exercise to design the study to show that, quite apart from the technology to actually do the personalization.
So that's actually a really interesting point, and maybe why the wellness market still has so much steam, because in the wellness market, you have a lot more space to get 1 million participants and randomize them to all kinds of different things, and test all these different versions,
right.
And there's a bit more latitude to play with those kinds of permutations than when you're trying to do something and explain to FDA exactly, I have 14 different versions, and here's the data that says that they're all good. There's a higher standard that you have to meet there,
right.
And less of a sandbox to play in.
Right. Yeah, I mean, the regulations are clear. You can't just change your code and push it out. That would be a misbranded product.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's interesting, right? So that's back to we're doing it like a medical device over here in DTx land for the most part, and then there's kind of this wild west of digital products still that are able to maybe innovate a bit more, but ultimately it's the clinical populations that need the innovation the most. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how to bridge that gap, but that seems like a really important one.
Yeah, well, as we've talked about on DTA meetings, there's slow movement by the regulatory bodies to allow a bit more flexibility in the development of relatively low risk, DTx type devices. That's one advantage the industry has for us. We're inherently low risk to the patient.
Oh, that's true. And FDA wants to innovate, right? Mm-hmm. It's just to innovate in a regulatory body takes a lot of time and collaboration. Indeed. So we're moving in that direction.
Yep.
Well, we're out of time, so thank you so much for joining me. This has been Simon Thomas and DTx Equals.
Thank you, Acacia.